Hello and welcome to this talk about karate, using martial art to do tests. And perhaps the titles sound funny for you, but the problem behind the scenes is interesting. Let me introduce me first. My name is Sacco. I work as developer since 2007 using different languages. Most of them are connected with the JVM, like Kotlin, Scala, Java. I also use other languages like PHP, Node.js, Haskell, and many others. I participate as technical reviewer on some of the biggest editorials around the world. I publish some books, course, and theoretical practical scenarios. Some of them appear on the presentation, there are on others. And I participate as a speaker on different conferences. You have my contact information, my LinkedIn, my email, my GitHub, so if you have any doubts, any question about this talk or other topic, just contact me and I will try to help you as soon as possible. Okay, let's start with our problem. You need to find a way to create an end-to-end and integration test at the same time. But you don't want that this depend on some specific framework. It's like, okay, my backend use Java and other use Go and another one use Rust. No, I don't want to limit my selection of one framework depending on how many languages there are in the backend. And I want to use this perhaps for another purpose. Perhaps I want to create performance test or a UI test. And I want to that this have a simple syntax, a simple way to understand what is the purpose of this test. And I want that this be simple to implement. I don't want that take a lot of time to understand how write a test, how to execute, how communicate to other one the purpose of my test. Let's start with BDD. Before that, we start with the selection of one library or framework. First one, what is BDD? Well, BDD is a strategy oriented to or put the focus on the behavior of our test, our application, what I want to check. It's more or less that something that anyone could understand in the company. I want to tell that my user was created successful and receive an email after that. This is simple to understand. The idea is that people on the company interact to understand and create this test. Could be a business analyst with the developers, perhaps a CTO or a QA with the developers. Many people interact to create the test. It's a simple way to document and communicate with others the purpose of this test. And it's not connected directly with any language. It's not like this is a technology connected with Java or Scala or another language. No, the idea is that it's agnostic to the technology. Perhaps there are many libraries or frameworks that use behind the scenes BDD. And use some common keywords like given, when, then. Okay, which libraries implement BDD? Well, first one, JBehavior, which is one of the oldest libraries that implement this on Java. The next one is Cucumber, Karate, Codetest for Kotlin, and Spock. There are some similarities between Cucumber and Karate, are closer because use the same format, use behind the scenes Gherkin. Gherkin is a language that provide you a simple way to write the test using a common language that anyone could understand. The other ones implies perhaps that you need to write more code. It's not simple for a QA or perhaps a CTO to understand what is the idea. Why I need to use Karate? Well, first one, because it's agnostic to the language on the framework. So imagine that you use in your application Java with Spring Boot, and for some reason you decide, okay, I want to migrate to Quarkus because I discovered that have an excellent performance, or I want to migrate. Imagine that you use Kotlin and you want to say, okay, I don't want to use more Spring Boot, I want to use Skater. With this library, with this framework, you can change from one language to another without affecting your test. You don't need to rewrite everything. Allow the idea of create the test in an idea of black box. So I send a request and I check only the response. I don't modify nothing in the behavior of the application. Remember that in the case that you use, for example, a Spring Boot test, you have the possibility to manipulate some of the classes to modify the behavior. I say, okay, I don't want that. In this case, go directly to the database or turn an exception. This is possible, and it has a simple syntax that anyone could understand. This is the syntax. There are some keywords that you need to know. First one is the keyword scenario, which represent our test. It's like more or less, I want to test this. In this case, the test create and retrieve a cat is a simple example. And you have the given to indicate which is the URL that you will do a request, and request to indicate which is the body of this request, which method that you use with the keyword when, and after that you can check the results of the execution of the test with the keyword then status represent the response HTTP status, and you have the and to concatenate the different conditions that you want to test. Okay, let's start with the example to see all of these things. Here you have the repository where you can find everything related with this talk. Here are the requirements that you need to have to run this project, the documentation, the JDK, and more information. Here you have a Docker Compose file which contains a microservices, a real microservices with a database, look here. And you can run to test this. In my case, I running, and here is the documentation, the URL of the documentation, the Swagger, and if you test, okay, the country is Argentina. I want to check what happened with Brazil. I want to add another one that not exists. Okay, here you have an error code. Great. So let's start with the things that we need to do. Well, you have the possibility to create a project that use or generate for you most of the initial structure on Karate. To do, you have this archetype. This is the command that you need to run. This is the group, the indication about which is the archetype, the version of the archetype, and here appear other information about which is the name of the project and the initial structure. So I will do click enter. Yes. Okay. And here is the project. Let me explain what is the idea of this. Okay. Here is the version of Java that this one use, and Karate, which is the most important dependency on this project. Here is the dependency, and this one is for a generic project. There is nothing strange here. And here you have the logback. This is for see the logs of the execution of the test. And you have this karate config.js. And why you have this file? Well, the idea is in the case that you need to modify some basic configuration about the base URL of this environment, or where you want to execute the test, or if you want to skip some specific type of test, these kind of things you can include here. Here is you have a default configuration, like M is the environment that this character receive, and a fake variable. So in the case that you need to change something, you need to modify this file. And here on the examples, you have a user feature which have the same structure that I show you on the presentation, but there are two different things that not appear on the previous one. First one is the background, and appear this URL with this string. And why this appear here? Well, imagine that you have different tests that go directly to the same host. For example, in our API is localhost. So it's not necessary that you write localhost many times. You define here a variable, and when you say path, this library do this for us. Replace or put the initial part of the URL here and execute the request. And you have something called feature. What is the idea of feature? Well, feature is like the name of our class of test. So a feature could have multiple scenarios, multiple tests. Okay, let me explain one little thing more after execute of the test. Here you have the runners. And what is the purpose of this runner? Well, the idea of the runner is execute all the tests that exist on one specific folder. In this case, I indicate, okay, I want that you execute all the tests that exist on the folder user in this part. Okay, how I can execute this test? Well, I need to run npm test. Okay, you have here the information about the execution, the request and the response, and look this. Here you have a URL about a report. And if I do click here, look this. You have a web page which contains all the information about the execution of this test. And you have the different scenarios, the get that you execute, all the information about the headers that you send, and the information that you receive from the response. Look this, you have all this information about the response. So with this in mind, you can create tests, and if you detect that something failed, you can go here and check what happened. And the timeline show you how many milliseconds tests take to execute each of the different tests. Okay, so let's start with some modification, because example, it's not our idea of test. I will modify this configuration, remember, because we need to modify or execute the test in the API catalog. So for do this, I change this one. It's the same. I create a variable with the name of the base path of my application, and here I declare the different host of the different environment. In my case, both environments have the same URL, but imagine that you will to check on production, you need to change this one or this one or some of them. The next step, well, I need to create a class that execute all my integration tests. But first, let me open the project in the correct way, because it's a Java project. This window, okay. I will create a class here with the name happy test. And more or less have the same information that the previous one. It's run all the tests. Look this, there is not folder because I'm the root. Root all my integration tests, and just in not taking consideration the tests that have this tag, this annotation. Okay, let me create a folder here, or a package. Call it catalog. And inside I will create another one with the name actuator. Let me check the actuator, something that we have in our application. And let me show you, because there is not something strange. I declare the background, I declare the feature as the same that I showed you previously. I put the name of the scenario, the method, the path, and look this. I forgot to copy and paste to show you. I have this variable. Def implies or means define a variable. In my case, I define a variable with the name health response OK. And what is the idea of this read? Well, read is a function that offers karate for us to read a file. There is another one to write a file. And why I need to read a file? Well, imagine this. I need to check a JSON file, a JSON, because what happens if I instead to do this, let me show you. Instead to do this, I do this. But imagine that my JSON have too many lines. It's not possible for us to understand what happened. And imagine that you have multiple tests that have the same response. So you duplicate this JSON multiple times. So a way to reduce this problem, it's define a variable and read the file as an external resource. In my case, I create two different folders, one to request and another one to response. And inside I put the JSON files. So the test, it's simple to understand because I know that, okay, I will read this file and I will to execute HTTP request with this URL. Using this method, I check that this is the return and I match the response. And in the case that I want to reuse, it's possible for me, it's not something strange. So I will execute again mn clean test. Okay, let me show you what happened with the result. Look this. Now I have two tests because I created. Here are real requests to my API. This one is the URL, which is the same URL that appeared here. And here is the response. Here you have all the definition about the background. And the same happen if you want to check the timeline. Okay, great. So this one is for the actuator. But imagine that you want to check something about another endpoint. For example, a real endpoint, because the actuator only gives me the information about if my application is healthy or not, and nothing more. So I will copy and paste the response, and I will copy and paste the files. Let me show you. Look this. This is an error case, that a city that not exists. Look this. The structure, it's more or less the same that the previous file. There is not changes. And in the case that there is something that it's okay, look this. Look, the structure is similar. I only change the status, only change this parameter and the name of the variable in the case that you want to change, but it's similar. I created another one just to show you, which is flow. And what is the idea of flow? Well, each of these scenarios only execute one HTTP request, but imagine that you need to run multiple HTTP requests. Well, in this case, I create a scenario that obtains the information about one particular city, and if the city exists, I will obtain the information about the country. So this scenario executes two different requests at the same time. Let me show you. Okay. Now you have all this information. I will close all the different scenarios. Let me show you the flow here. Here is the response, and here you have the response of the other request. Okay, there is another thing that I don't show you when I create the actuator endpoints. Imagine that you have a dynamic attribute, for example, the ID or the creation date or something like that, that it's dynamic. You can't infer which is the possible value. Well, Karate offered to you some special wildcards. Wildcard, it's this one. Instead to put the name of the version, because this API, the version of the API change each time that I deploy. So you can use this not null. There is not null, not present, number, string, boolean. There are tons of these different things. So with this in mind, you can say or indicate to Karate, okay, verify that something exists on this attribute, but not checked if one specific value. Okay, what else? Well, let me show you one little thing at the end. So imagine that you have this test, and for some reason you want to create a performance test. Oh, I need to use another tool. I need to recreate all these scenarios. Well, no, with Karate, you can combine with something called Gatling. Gatling is a performance tool. So let me show you how you can do this. I will open the POM file. I put all the structure, and I will tell you what things we need to do. First, I create two different profiles to execute my integration or end-to-end test and my performance test in a separate steps. Here is the name of the profile and the dependencies that you need to include. Karate, which is the same that I include by default, and here Karate with Gatling. And you need all of these plugins to execute the performance test, because as I mentioned, Karate need to combine with Gatling. So you need to have all the things connected with Gatling to execute this test. This is a common configuration that appeared on the official documentation of Karate, so don't pay attention about all the dependencies. You can copy and paste. Okay, great. How I can verify if this works or not, or how I create my simulation. Well, you need to create a file here on the city, call it, let me just, here, simulation Scala. In my case, I have Scala installed, but if you don't have installed in your machine Scala, don't pay attention, because this do all for you, the plugins. So let me explain the syntax about this. You need to extend this class for simulation. You need to indicate which is the URL pattern that you want to check, where the Gatling need to listen about the modifications. This one is a generic configuration. You need to define the environment, and here is where you declare that you want to use some specific file. In this case, I will to indicate, okay, I want to create an integration, a performance test about this feature or this test, and this is my scenario to test. Okay, inject 10 users during 20 seconds, and this is the assertions. Okay, I want that 90% of my requests take less than 1 second, and these are percentage that you can modify. So how I can run this one is npm clean test, and while this p, because I need to indicate which specific profile I need to execute. In this case, I need to run, I think it's connected with the version of Java that I use it. Let me change Java, use Java. Let me change because I have the last version of Java and some of the dependencies not work fine. Okay, this one will take some seconds to execute. Okay, here you have more or less some information about the execution, but in the same way that happened with karate, all of this information, it's not a good idea to check. So perhaps a good idea is check in a graphic way. You have here on target, you have the Gatling folder, and if I go here and do click, I will have all the information about my execution. The number of requests that I execute, the distribution on the time, the response time, and many other valuable information. Okay, just to summarize. Some best practices: use wildcard when you have random values. Not include directly the JSON inside of your karate test. Have different profiles to execute your performance test, your integration test. Define a structure to put the files inside, not in one folder, put all the karate test. Reuse the scenario. You have the possibility to call one feature or one karate test into another one, and create function if you need it. For example, the read and write are defined functions, so you can have, or you have the possibility to create another ones. Here are some books that cover most of the topics that appear on this talk, and some blogs in the case that you want more information. Thanks.